Hi guys. I wanted to kind of talk about some more stuff on borderline personality disorder from my book. And I wanted to talk about stigma and common myths about borderline personality disorder. Okay, so this is the book that I've been referring to. So that's it. Okay, so I'll do some reading. Let's see. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so here it says, although many mental health problems have a social stigma attached to them, the stigma associated with BPD is especially strong. And I think a lot of us already know that. Advocacy groups and consumer organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, have worked tirelessly over the past decade to decrease the stigma attached to severe mental illness. As a result, we now see fewer negative portrayals of people with these mental illnesses in the media. As well as less misinformation in general. However, the stigma associated with BPD seems to persist to this day. I don't think they're really trying. If you watch any movies that say that they're portraying borderline personality, the only one that I think comes even close to being relatable is Girl Interrupted. They say that Winona Ryder's character supposedly has BPD in the movie. So that's really the only one. I mean, there's Fatal Attraction with Glenn Close and Michael Douglas, and it's a little extreme, and that was really one of the first portrayals of BPD in a movie in Hollywood. Anyways, on with it. Okay, where are we? Why would society stigmatize people with BPD more than people with other disorders? Although we don't know for sure, there are a few possible reasons. First, until recently, the causes of BPD were poorly understood. And unfortunately, sometimes people react most negatively to problems they can't understand, and that, yes, that makes sense. Second, as we mentioned earlier, many of the symptoms of BPD hit a nerve for people in our society. Some of the behaviors that go along with BPD may be shocking and difficult to understand. For example, self-harm and suicide attempts may frighten and confuse others, and they can be hard to relate to. When people don't understand a behavior, and especially when that behavior scares them, it is sometimes easier to judge the person who is engaging in the behavior than it is to make an effort to understand that person. Also, our society generally values being calm, cool, collected, and in control, something that people with BPD often struggle with. Indeed, because people with BPD, so redundant, have very strong emotions and often express these emotions in extreme or dramatic ways. People who value being in control of emotions may judge people with BPD, and they may even develop inaccurate or negative beliefs about people with BPD. It's very redundant. These intense emotions and shocking or frightening behaviors seen in BPD may form the basis of social stigma about BPD. I'm fidgety tonight. Okay, I'll just finish that part. Finally, another source of stigma may be the television and film media. Okay. The media they seem to be drawn to BPD, probably because of some of the strengths that often go along with it. People with BPD can be dramatic, exciting, and charismatic, and the intensity of their experiences can be engaging. So it is probably not surprising that the television and film producers are interested in depicting such strong, intense, and dramatic characters. The problem is that in seeking to get good ratings and go for the dramatic effect, the media tend to depict one-sided and simplistic representations of BPD that are usually negative. In fact, negative, inaccurate, and insensitive portrayals of people with BPD are seen quite regularly. Although it is likely not done with a malicious intent, these portrayals contribute to the stigma attached to the disorder and make it harder for the public to really understand this disorder. I'd have to say the majority of people that I've mentioned, not even about having it, but just about it in general, have no clue what the heck it is. No clue. They haven't heard of it. So I'm going to go on about some myths about borderline personality disorder. Here, just go to the list. Okay, myth 1. People with BPD are manipulative and attention-seeking. This is one of the most common myths about BPD. In fact, this myth is so common that it is found not only in the media but also in some academic, clinical, and research literature. I've seen it even just when I was first trying to figure out what the hell it was. When I got diagnosed, I was looking online, which probably not the best place to look. But there's some pretty nasty articles out there. Kind of make us out to be monsters. This myth is likely developed as a misguided attempt to explain some of the problems that people with BPD tend to struggle with, especially suicidal and self-harm behaviors. As we mentioned before, for people who have not struggled with these behaviors, seeing someone engage in them can be shocking, scary, and incomprehensible. There's my big word for the day. As a result, suicidal and self-harm behaviors can evoke intense emotional responses in others, including fear, anger, sadness, guilt, and confusion. What's more, because these behaviors are so serious and life-threatening, many people find that they want to intervene quickly to help or support the person that engages in them. And I'm speaking from my experience. I never did any of that for attention. I didn't want anybody to know. I wouldn't let anybody know. If they did, then it just sent me into another spiral of guilt and shame, and it just, the vicious cycle like my other video. It was the same thing. I mean, where am I? We believe that this very common desire to help people with serious and life-threatening problems may have ironically led to the belief that people with BPD are manipulative. So specifically, seeing themselves act quickly to provide help, support, and reassurance to people with the disorder, some mental health professionals may have concluded that people with BPD are using self-harm or suicide attempts to manipulate others into paying attention to them or helping them. So the cry for help. The problem with this way of thinking is that you can't infer a person's intentions based on the effects of his or her behaviors. Yeah, I guess you can't call someone manipulative if it's your choice to jump in and help. And then you could say you were being manipulated, but they weren't asking you to do it. But I get what they're saying here. So the problem with this way of thinking is that you can't infer a person's intentions based on the effects of his or her behavior. I don't know if I already read that line, sorry. No. For example, let's say that you are rushing to work in order to avoid being late, and you ran a red light and struck a pedestrian. Saying that people with BPD attempt suicide in order to manipulate others into providing support is like saying you ran the red light in order to hit the pedestrian. In another example, if we saw a woman drink a huge glass of water, we may assume that she was drinking that water because she was thirsty. But there are other reasons why someone might drink water that we might not be taking into account. For example, maybe the woman wasn't thirsty but had a scratchy throat. Maybe she was trying to stop from hiccuping. Maybe she was hungry. The point is, there is really no way of knowing, and if we simply assume, we may come to the wrong conclusion. So the same principles apply here. Knowing that self-harm and suicide attempts may lead others to provide attention or help does not actually tell us why someone engages in those behaviors. In fact, if we discuss, okay, blah, blah, blah. No. It's just talking about something else and later in the book. Okay, so myth 1. People with BPD are manipulative and attention-seeking. No. Myth 2. People with BPD are violent individuals at high risk for harming others. From my experience, the disorder tends to aim harm at yourself, and the last thing I ever wanted to do or want to do is hurt others. So that's my little blurt for that. This is simply not true. Despite the way BPD is often portrayed on the big and small screens, people with BPD are not generally violent and are actually at a very low risk of hurting others. In fact, many people with BPD will go to great lengths to avoid hurting others in any way at all. And yes, sure, sacrificing their own needs and wants to try to make others happy. I don't know if you guys can relate. People with BPD are often scared of being alone and desperately want to hold on to their relationships. Therefore, they often go out of their way to take care of others. They certainly wouldn't want to do anything that might cause someone to leave or reject them. I got some messy ass hair tonight. Most researchers would agree that people with BPD are far more likely to hurt themselves than to hurt other people. One of the hallmark symptoms of BPD is self-destructive and self-damaging behaviors, and the general consensus is that people with BPD tend to direct anger inward rather than outward. Okay, so myth 2. Myth 3. BPD is a life sentence. Until several years ago, people thought that BPD was incurable. and that once you had this disorder, you were stuck with it for life. I was actually told that when I got diagnosed, that there's no cure. Yeah, so I was pretty damn scared, and I fell into a black hole for a little while. This is one reason why some clinicians actually refuse to diagnose patients with BPD. They feared that patients would be burdened with this diagnosis and judged as untreatable. It's pretty sad. We now know that this is not true, and that BPD actually has a very good prognosis. In fact, recent research suggests that people are more likely to recover from BPD than from bipolar disorder. This is likely due to our increased knowledge about BPD, as well as improvements in treatments for this disorder. Okay, so that's some good news. Myth 4 is BPD is untreatable. Kind of similar. So it's related to the preceding myth, and it is an interesting one because of why it may have developed. Before we had the knowledge we now have with the disorder, many mental health professionals had difficulties treating people with borderline, and saw that their treatments did not seem to be working. Sorry, it's a habit to stop when I hear a squeaky door, because in my other videos I would edit that out, but I can't with this, so no big deal. Okay, so therefore they decided that BPD must not be a treatable disorder. Sorry, I'm trying to skip all the bull. It's very repetitive. Anyways, it's treatable, okay? And the treatment, oh, here we go. I will do a video on treatments, medications, all that stuff. This is just for myths, okay? So I don't want you to feel like I'm skipping out on anything important. Okay, so myth 5, BPD is caused by bad parents. Many mental health professionals used to think that BPD was caused by the patient's bad relationship with his or her mother during early childhood. In fact, there was a tendency throughout the fields of psychology and psychiatry to blame mothers for many problems experienced by children. That's kind of terrible. Although this bad mothering fallacy has been corrected in many areas of psychology, the belief that BPD is caused by abusive, neglectful, or bad parenting still exists. There are a couple things to keep in mind about the myth. First, there's a difference between something that increases the risk, which is a risk factor, and something that is necessary for the disorder for this disorder to develop, which is a necessary cause. With borderline, there is evidence that childhood abuse increases the risk for borderline personality disorder, and may contribute to the development of the disorder for some people. However, not everyone with BPD has been abused. In fact, most people with BPD do not have a history of abuse. The same thing applies to neglect. Although we know that neglect increases the risk for BPD and is one of the potential causes, I will do a video on causes as well. It's kind of controversial, and I'll get into it. I'm kind of just skimming back and forth through the book. Not everyone who has borderline was neglected by their parents. Okay. So therefore, the experience of a bad relationship with one's caregivers is not necessary for the development of the disorder. Oh, this long video. Okay, there's more of a write-up, a little bit more on that, because that's a big part of it. Lots of arguments about it. Myth 6. People with BPD are crazy and irrational. Can be. The myth couldn't be farther from the truth. People with BPD are in... Oh, sorry. It's so dark. Show me the light. People with BPD are in a lot of pain, and they struggle with intense, overwhelming emotions. At times, this struggle may get the better of them, and lead them to do or say things in a desperate attempt to make themselves feel better. Although they will often regret these things later on. I'm having a hard time reading. In the moment, these actions provide much needed relief from intense emotional pain. As mentioned previously, we know that all behaviors have a purpose and meet some important need for that individual. Okay? Even if they also cause that person further problems and distress in the long run. Sometimes you don't know till it's too late. Even behaviors that may seem incomprehensible to someone who has not struggled with them, such as suicide attempts, self-harm, and drug abuse, serve an important purpose for that person in the moment. In fact, people often attempt suicide, use drugs, or harm themselves in order to meet some very basic human needs. For example, to feel better, get some relief, or release emotional pain. These behaviors are really neither crazy nor irrational. Indeed, they often work very well to meet these needs in the short run. The problem is that these self-destructive behaviors have serious downsides over the long term. Okay, there's a little bit more on that too. A lot of triggering concepts and examples. So I'm going to move on. Myth 7. BPD is only found in women. At a basic level, this idea is simply not true. Men can and do develop BPD. Okay. In fact, research suggests that men with BPD have the same problems and struggles as women with BPD do. I've known a male with BPD, and actually I got along with him super well. But same things he was struggling with. That the disorder looks the same in people of both genders. It just might show it differently, you know. I don't know. I can't really think of any examples or anything. Okay, so 7 myths. People with BPD are manipulative and attention-seeking. Myth. People with BPD are violent individuals at high risk for harming others. Myth. BPD is a life sentence. No. BPD is untreatable. BPD is caused by bad parents. That's it could be. It's not necessarily, what it's caused by, the root cause. People with BPD are crazy and irrational. And BPD is only found in women, so there's some nasty myths out there about the disorder. Well, about any disorder. Okay. So, I just wanted to do some reading for you guys tonight, okay? So, I hope you take care, and I will talk to you later.